If y'all would, please take a seat. We're a little bit past time, but only 3 or 4 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Mooney. Good morning. It is great to have y'all here, and it's great to be at this College and Career Academy. We appreciate the enthusiasm, we appreciate the attendance, and we appreciate all the hard work that Senate staff and all, and of course, the great Senator Jason Anavartarte and his people have put together to bring this, to help the same work. So first of all, I'd like to start off saying I'm Senator Billy Hickman from the 4th Senatorial District down in Statesboro, Georgia. And I think that several of y'all in this room have already told me that you had either children or grandchildren that went to Georgia Southern. And we really appreciate y'all's money sending your money down in that area. My counties that I represent are Evans County, Canada County, Bullock County, Effingham County, and about 60,000 people in Chatham County area. Senators represent about 200,000 people, and representatives represent about 60 to 70,000 people. So I'm going to turn it over and let our distinguished senators here introduce themselves, and one of them just left. Okay, introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of get on with the program. Okay.
Well, good morning. I'm Jason Anavartarte. I have the honor to serve you here in Cedartown and Polk County and across West Georgia in District 31. I also have the honor to chair the Majority Caucus in the Senate with these fine colleagues and Senator Beach, who just stepped out for a moment. And just want to say thank you for being here to talk about this issue. And I have a few more words I'll share in a few minutes. Thank you.
Well, hello. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Russ Goodman. I serve as chairman of the Senate Ag Committee. I'm from a little farming community called Cogdale. That's between Waycross and Valdosta. I'm probably about as rural of a senator as you get. I have to drive 11 miles to buy a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk. I live in the 3rd largest county in the state, and only 6,600 people live in it. I'm a blueberry farmer. And I represent the areas Lowndes, Echols, Clinch, Lanier, Atkinson, Ware, and Pierce counties. And just thankful that y'all are here and that you're taking an interest in this issue. I said before, I'm a farmer myself, and so it's near and dear to my heart. And I look forward to the information that we're going to hear today, and really appreciate Senator Hickman and his pushing on this issue. And you know, it's been tough down in my part of the world with a hurricane, and it's kind of nice as I was driving up here to get to see some timberland that wasn't tore all to pieces. So I know Senator Beach stepped out. He stepped out to take a phone call, so maybe he gets back.
Thank you, Russ. We'd like to show hands of the people that want to have lunch with us. We go school or someone's going to go out and find lunch. So if you would raise your hand if you're going to stay for lunch.
Shy.
Yeah, don't be shy.
All right. There you go, Glenn.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And again, thank y'all for being here. So,
So I just want to real quick and I know just in the interest of time, Pastor Madden, if you'll come forward, I'm going to ask you to bless this day. Where's Brett? Where'd he go? Oh, okay. As Brett's coming up, I do want to just say a couple of thank yous for a couple of special folks in the room. First, Glenn Robinson, thank you for getting everything organized with the Polk County School District. All the school district staff are making this happen this morning. This is important to the folks here and some of the folks that are watching at home and not here because of the topic. And Glenn, you've been a supporter since day one, and I want to thank you for what you do for farmers every single day, and even what you've been doing in your own time for the last several weeks, helping farmers and families in South Georgia recover from the storm. So thank you from the bottom of my heart of everything that you do for this community. I also want to recognize the chairman of Polk County, Hal Floyd's in the room. Hal, thank you for being here. And give the microphone to Jessica in just a minute. And I also want to recognize my chairman from Paulding County, David Carmichael. He's in the room. And Dave, just want to say thank you for coming over from Dallas to join us for this topic. I know most people view Paulding County as a suburban county with, maybe not a lot of farmers, but we do have a rural community. We still have a few farmers left in Paulding County, and always sensitive to fighting for them, especially in South and West Paulding. So Pastor Madden, also member of the Polk County School Board, asked you to come up and you just say a prayer for us, sir.
Right. Y'all would please stand.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming today. On behalf of Polk School District, we're thankful for all of you and all that you do for our kids and our people here at PSD. It's my honor and privilege to represent Cedartown First Methodist Church as their pastor here in Cedartown. And I am reminded today of the simple words from the lyrics, "This is my Father's world." I share this one lyric before we go to the Lord in prayer. This is my Father's world. Oh, let me ne'er forget that though the wrong seems off so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world. Why should my heart be sad? The Lord is King, let the heavens ring. God reigns, let the earth be glad. Let us pray. Oh, gracious God, as we come to this house today, I thank you for all your many blessings. Oh, loving God, the work done in this session today, let it be yours. As we remember the people who make up the great state of Georgia, who you have blessed with so many wonderful resources. But oh, Heavenly Father, the work that Hurricane Helene has done, especially to our counterparts to our east and south, watch over them as these are hard times. While you are no stranger to times like these, it is the hearts of men who care and women who go forth and want to serve your name, to lift up our brothers and sisters who are going through trials such as these. Heavenly Father, your work continues. Let us be a part of it with a spirit of love and compassion and grace that has only been shown just to us. Oh God, be with this time in this group this day, and let us always remember that our Father in heaven still reigns. In your loving name I pray. Amen.
Thanks, Stan.
I'll ask to come forward the Rockmart FFA students, lead us in our pledge, and then we'll turn it over to Chairwoman Payton.
Attention, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
Thank you. Great job.
Yeah. Yo, if y'all would still remain standing, we're gonna sing, and we've done this as a tradition of this study committee. We're gonna sing, all we're gonna sing "God Bless America," okay? Led by my wife Joanne.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
don't know. Is this on? My name is Jessica Payton. I am the commission chair for the city of Cedartown, and a commission chair for a commission in the state of Georgia is like a mayor. We're just not called a mayor. Thank you all for coming to visit the city of Cedartown and Polk School District and Cedartown High School and this amazing college and career academy building that we have. I am so grateful for all of the farmers that we have. Being the most city girl that could ever happen in a country county, my gratitude for farmers knows no bounds, because without you, I would not be able to go on. Anyhow, I'm so grateful for all of you to be here. And the preservation of farmland is an important issue right now, not only in the state of Georgia, but all over the nation. And I'm excited for this program.
Thank you, Jessica.
Senator Beach, if you would introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, I'll be real quick. Thank you all for being here. This is a great crowd. I'm Brandon Beach. I represent the 21st District, which is, I live in Alpharetta. I represent North Fulton and Cherokee County. I'm in my 6th term, wrapping up my 6th term and running for a 7th term. I chair Economic Development and Tourism, serve on Transportation, Appropriation and Rules, and something called Committee on Assignments. And just glad to be here and learn more about what y'all are doing and what we're going to do to help you guys continue. Agriculture is our #1 business, and we want to make sure we preserve our farmland. I want to thank Jason over here that he led the charge, and I was involved in it also on making sure some of our adversaries cannot buy farmland in our state, especially the communist China. They're trying to buy farmland, and we want to make sure we keep farmland in your hands and make you guys continue to do well. So I look forward to learning more about what's going on in the agriculture business. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to do a little bit different we got the agenda that's been published, and many of y'all have seen the published. Well, let me back up just a second. I think this group sang better, Joanne, than any group we've had. Yeah, and I think we got more baritones and basses in here than we do sopranos, though. But thank y'all for it. Really sounded good. We appreciate that. We're going to deviate a little bit. Senator Goodman, as he said, he's from Cogdale, Georgia. And I actually went on the Georgia map the other day and found that little tiny dot, Cogdale. But he and another senator of ours, Sam Watson, who is from Moultrie, were right in the area of the storm that came through, the Helene storm. And so I'd ask him if he would to kind of give us an update on what it, not economic update, because Will Bentley's going to do that for us, but just what it meant for his area to experience this and to see the devastation, and not only the dollar devastation, but the mental devastation of this situation. So Russ, if you would, please.
Well, needless to say, it's been the biggest economic loss to the agricultural community in our state, and that went right through our area of the state. I know at our farm, it's about a $6 million loss between blueberry bushes and timber, and what's coming forward as far as crop loss. Been a lot of broken-hearted folks in my part of the world. I've seen too many grown men that would just about walk through the gates of hell before they'd show another man any vulnerability, just break down and cry in front of me. And I've had, especially people in our produce industry that they don't have crop insurance. They can only really, for the crops that they grow, the only crop insurance they can buy is bell pepper. We're cutting timber at our place now, wood that would have cut for $20 a ton. We're cutting for $5 a ton. And so, it's mighty hard to pay taxes, property taxes on land for 20 years and have something like this happen. And you hope just to get enough out of it to plant it back. And then you got to pay property taxes on the land for another 20 years. That's a tough deal. And really going into this storm, our farming community, especially our row crop farmers in South Georgia, were already struggling. We went up to Washington. We've been 2 or 3 times in the last 2 months. But in preparing for one of those trips, I called a lot of ag lenders Now USDA is reporting that the average debt to asset ratio in the United States is 12.5% in agriculture. That's meaning for every dollar in asset, there's 12.5 cents worth of debt. I can put you on the phone with a dozen ag lenders in my part of the world, and they'll tell you when the credit loans are fully extended that their average debt to asset ratio is 60 to 65%. So when these losses hit, it's going to be a tough deal because once you get to that 75, 80%, banks can't lend you money. And then also we have, what we're looking at with commodity prices, where cotton is basically selling for the same price it was the year I was born, and I'm 47 years old. Rural America this year is going to absorb about a $20 billion loss in corn, about a $3 billion loss in cotton. It's a tough deal. And one of the things that we've got to do as an ag community is those folks that aren't involved in production agriculture, we have to continue to tell our story, because through policies that are coming out of Washington, we're continuing to see our ag community and our farming sector erode. I don't know if y'all saw it, but for the first time last year in our nation's history, we became a net importer of food. We had a $17 billion trade deficit last year, $32 billion this year, and it's going to be $40 billion next year. And, a nation that can't feed itself can't sustain itself. And so I say all that to say, before this storm, our ag community in my part of the world was already struggling. And, we've got to have some help out of Washington, because I can promise you up in New York and places like that, there are already some of these folks gathering, private equity folks. In my part of the world, we'd call them carpetbaggers, getting ready to come down here and try to gobble up some of this stuff. And I've seen a lot of folks, 70-year-old folks, that their retirement was wrapped up in their timber, and it's gone. And they were hoping to use that timber to fund their retirement and be able to pass the land on to the next generation. And so, as anybody here that knows me well knows, I can get long-winded. So I'm going to try to wrap it up, but just to say that it has been devastating, but I have seen the best of the American spirit come through in my community. The way everybody, we stood up churches, and we were feeding people, and we live in a pretty divisive society sometimes politically, but I can tell you there wasn't any red or blue tents when we were feeding folks, and nobody asked somebody if they were Republican or Democrat before they gave them a meal. It was just neighbors looking out for neighbors, and I was very proud of that. But as we move forward, we've got to advocate for our farmers. We sent out a letter. There were 10 or 11 counties that were not included in the hurricane map. We had 54 of 56 state senators sign on to that letter with me and sent it to Secretary Vilsack. That letter actually got to him today, and I'm really proud of that. We had almost unanimity amongst our Senate chamber in advocating for our farmers, because those farmers bought those hurricane policies, and the federal government needs to make that right. For those of y'all that don't know, when the storm came through, it severely damaged the facility there in Asheville, North Carolina, where that data is compiled at. So we're hoping that we're going to get some good news on that front as well. But honored to be here, and I'm going to turn it back over to Chairman Hickman. I'm sorry if I've depressed y'all, but that's just that's where we're at, y'all. But you know what Elvis Presley used to say? He said, "If you're going through hell, keep going." So we're going to keep going.
Yeah, thank you, Russ. Very well said. Our pastor John Waters always says, "If the Lord takes you up to the fire, He'll take you through the fire." Let me give you a little bit of background while we're here. This is actually our fourth meeting. We started out in Statesboro, then we went to Cornelia, Georgia, and then we went to Moultrie, Georgia. Actually, Sam Watson was the one that put it on for us, and we did it on a Wednesday, and the storm hit on Thursday. And because at that point in time, people thought the storm was going to turn left instead of turning right. So that was a little bit, but that's part of the reason Sam's not here today. And then here in Polk County. We appreciate this. We're just trying to get information out there. We've got some recommendations that's already come out of this committee, and we'll continue hopefully today have some more recommendations. Some of the speakers have already told me they've got recommendations for us. But as I've told our people in our part of the world, my district, is we can stand on the corners and talk about it. We can stand on the sidewalks and talk about it. We can fuss about it into wherever it's at. But until the legislature buys into things, that's when things really start happening. And that's why we need y'all's input, and we need y'all to help us understand it. Because if we don't understand it, it does not go any further. And I've seen that in bills in the Senate, is people would typically vote no on a bill if they don't understand it. And a lot of times people won't dig into it and try to figure out what the bill is. It's just easy to vote no. So let me tell you, this is why we're here. It's Senate Resolution 470. And it's called Preservation of Georgia Farmland. And I think now we almost need to change it to Preservation of Georgia Farmers. Actually, the first 5 signers on the bill, three of those first 5 signers were full-time farmers. One was a part-time farmer, and the other one was Senate Majority Leader Steve Gooch. This kind of started out by what's going on in Statesboro. You know, we got Hyundai plant that's within of our county line, Bullitt County, probably 8 or 10 miles of our county line. 8,500 jobs, $6 to $8 billion, 4 big deep wells dug at the lower part of our county that's going to supply the growth in the lower part of our county. And then also 2 of those wells are allocated to Hyundai and Bryan County. So Brad Vaughn, TJ Hudson, TJ is one of the Lieutenant Governor's aides, the representative across the, and myself met with about 30 or 35 farmers in Bullitt County and listened to their concerns about all this. Concerns about the growth, concerns about water, concerns about, taking up farmland and so forth. And so we met one afternoon in September 23, and then Brad Vaughn, actually, who is testifying today on the or giving a speech today on the new property tax bill. If those of you, if you haven't voted yet, please vote. We need to ask you that. Please get out and vote. And from my opinion, I don't know about these guys, but I voted yes on all three amendments. And so I think that those are good from our standpoint. One of those is the property tax. Brad then went back and spent a half a day with our farmers in Bullitt County talking to them. You know, one of the greatest sayings I've heard through this whole process is Catherine Moore, who actually is one of our speakers today, and I give her full credit of this. She says the greatest hindrance to agriculture is unplanned growth. Think about that. The greatest hindrance to agriculture is unplanned growth. And we see that in our area, in Bullitt County. When we go down I-16, I've used this example several times. A big field, there was a cotton field and a peanut field for years, has now got 4 houses stuck out in the middle of it. That's over with. It's pretty simple. The greatest hindrance to agriculture is unplanned growth. You know, we know we got to protect agriculture, but we also got to provide jobs for our children and our grandchildren, because we need for our children and grandchildren to remain in our communities. From 1974, this is the information that Russ gave me, from 1974 to 2016, that we have lost in Georgia over 2.6 million acres of cropland to cropland, meaning cotton, soybeans, peanuts, hay land, to development, and lost over 1 million acres of timberland. Senate Resolution 470 on line 20 and 21 says, whereas the Senate should evaluate farmland protection measures implemented in other agricultural states, see what other people are doing, and seek the advice of experts in agricultural economics. I just want to tell you who a couple of members of our committee that could not be here today. Freddie Powell Sims, who is down in the Albany area, and Jason Esteves, who is in the Atlanta area, and of course I mentioned Sam Watson down in Moultrie. Today's October 28th. This is our 4th on the road committee meeting. Our next meeting will be at the Capitol sometime in the latter part of November, first part of December, and that will be our wrap-up meeting. So to go on from there is our first speaker. I see him at the back of the room, is Will Bentley, President of Georgia Agribusiness Council. And Will's title is Georgia Agriculture, Honoring Our Past, Navigating the Present, and Securing the Future. I like that title, man. Pretty cool. You come up with that yourself? Oh, right here. Right here.
Use this one.
Did you send us some information? Page two?
I got it to her late last night, Chairman. I apologize for that. It was earlier than I normally would do a presentation put together, but and the title is something you and I kind of worked on together, and just know off the top, I prefer to kind of give a presentation, then answer some more questions at the end than me just kind of dictate to y'all. Would be more my style. But I'm Will Bentley with the Georgia Agribusiness Council, and for those of you that don't know, the Agribusiness Council is really an organization that represents all sectors of agriculture, from farmers and production agriculture up to major manufacturers and all the grower groups in between. We work a lot on policy, work with y'all obviously at the state capitol, and then also Chairman Goodman mentioned some work in DC, and we do that work as well, and work with a lot of our other organizations. And you mentioned Mr. Glenn earlier. Mr. Glenn's been doing good work for a long time. I was with the Cattlemen's Association before. I was with Agribusiness Council and spent a lot of time in Polk County and working with their Cattlemen's Association, and see a lot of familiar faces there. We used to meet in I think it was the VA, and they'd be having some concerts going on in the other room too. So this is a nicer space when they have more dignified folks there, I guess. But glad to be back here and a long history of working with this group up here. So I want to talk first a little bit about obviously agriculture. Y'all mentioned how strong agriculture is in our state. I'll talk a little bit about the disaster, and then some farmland preservation and maybe some recommendations that we've seen from other states and things like that. So everybody knows, I think agriculture is the #1 industry in the state of Georgia. Directly an economic value for the last farm gate value of $18.3 billion. So that sells off the farm. That's cows going to the market. That's, cotton going to the gym, whatever it is, that's directly off the farm. But food and fiber production, a contribution of $83.6 billion to the state of Georgia. And that's pretty large when you consider the entire economy is about $1.4 trillion. And the last number, 323,000 jobs. And I know Senator Goodman and I have talked about this a lot, but in other parts of the state, that's statewide. So 1 in 7 jobs across the state are involved in agribusiness or touch it in some way. But when you get outside of Metro Atlanta and the rural counties, which 120 of our counties are deemed rural counties in the state of Georgia, that's more like 1 in 4. So 25% of the jobs in rural Georgia are directly tied to agriculture. So here in Polk County, a farm gate value of $63 million in ag sales, a $480 million economic impact, and then 1,700 jobs in this county alone are wrapped up in agriculture. And I always like to do that wherever we go, just so they know that they're part of the impact to the state and what it is. And I think it'd be a lot of cattle and hay and poultry and other things like that in this part of the world, as you can imagine. So you mentioned a little bit about the devastation from Hurricane Helene. And unfortunately, I don't have any better news than has already been brought up, and not to depress the room even further. But if you look at those numbers that I just talked about, and then you look at the damage from Hurricane Helene, you can see how catastrophic that was to our industry. $6.46 billion in economic damage to agribusiness. And these numbers come from initial reports from the University of Georgia and the Forestry Commission and Department of Ag and others. $1.8 billion in direct farm loss in that region, which basically goes from Valdosta to Augusta and obviously runs into other parts of the Southeast as well. $1.3 billion in direct forestry losses. Y'all can read there on the numbers to individual commodities, but what kind of strikes me on the cotton side and the state of the ag economy in Georgia, the mood of the ag economy in Georgia turns on cotton a lot of times. And when you go through South Georgia, the heaviest parts of our row crop part of the state. You see a lot of cotton out there. They were already depressed. We were already spending time working on the economic disaster package, but at the time it was a disaster package focused on the economics of agriculture. We've been up there several times, and there's some appetite there in Congress to do something. Well, now we have a real natural disaster. So the focus kind of turns to that, but cotton was already seeing prices that are essentially what they were, you mentioned 30, 40, 50 years ago, and what they're dealing with again now. Pecans, which y'all know are a long-term crop, 420,000 trees were lost is an estimate. And I think that's probably low. We spent some time with one farmer that I think he said he lost 40 to 50,000 trees on one farm. So, I mean, I think you'll see that number grow as they get in there and see what damage is actually done to trees when maybe they don't see them pushed over, but there is damage. Vegetables, a huge part of our economy now, and something that's been growing over the last 15, 20 years, fruit and vegetable growth there, $120 million loss. And what's significant there is we lost 40% of our fall crop to the state of Georgia. And when you see these losses, it's not just the economic damage that's done this year. What we worry about, especially on fruit and vegetables, is market loss to other countries and other competitors that move in and try to take that from us. And that's a super competitive market. And I'd assume that's what Senator Watson's doing right now, is probably selling some fall vegetables. If I know him, he's probably working hard to market that right now. But green industry, $450 million in loss, and it goes on and on and on. But I want to talk a little bit about poultry, a huge part of the state economy, the largest part of our ag economy, $520 million in direct losses this year. And what's probably most devastating was the loss of 800 poultry houses. When we visit down there, or if you fly over down there, you can just see the loss to those poultry houses. It looks like a bomb went off in a lot of those cases, and some of them are still standing, but they're damaged, and there'll be long-term effects of that as well. But that'll impact their entire regional economy. And you talk about the Douglas area and how reliant they are on some poultry there and the business there, but they're committed to building back and getting back on their feet. And unfortunately, some of those things take longer than others. With some of the crops, we can replant again in the spring and keep going, but some of those are going to be long-term losses. So what we're here to talk about today, specifically, the preservation of farmland. You know, a lot of times you hear the quotes, and I know Commissioner Harper likes to give quotes, so I thought I'd throw one in, but this one's from Margaret Mitchell. The land is the only thing in the world worth working for, worth fighting for, worth dying for, because it's the only thing that lasts. So the work that y'all are doing is so important, because they're not making any more land. I had that conversation with my brother-in-law this weekend. He has a river property, and he was talking about some people have come in and made offers, and his response to selling it had nothing to do with, or not selling it had nothing to do with the money. It's about they're not making any more of it. And that's what's so significant about ag land and trying to preserve that. You talked some about the loss. We've seen a significant loss of farmland and total farmland across the state of Georgia. And I use 1985 because that's the year I was born. We had 13.5 million acres of farmland and 50,000 individual farms in the state. And fast forward to last year, we're down to 10 million. Some say 10 to 11. USDA and University of Georgia numbers vary a little bit based on what they think are farms or not farms, but somewhere between 10 and 11 million acres left, and down to 39,000 farms in the state of Georgia. And that last number there is just the average size of farms, and that doesn't look like much, 212 to 235 acres, but that takes into effect all the people that consider a 10 or 15 acre farm. Those are a lot of times going away and being developed. And so you see the size grow. If you're involved in production agriculture, you know it's hard to make any kind of living or any kind of money on a smaller farms. And the realities are the ones that are still in business have gotten to be well over 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 and bigger farms. And they're still what we consider to be family farms. So what are we losing? And I might not have should have used some of their numbers since they're speaking after me, but I guess that's the joy of going first. I usually have to speak after Tyler or Russ, and I always say that's hard to do because they got all the numbers dialed in. But according to the American Farmland Trust, between 2001 and 2016, just in that 15-year period, we lost 544,000 acres of ag land. 173,000 was lost to urban development, and 371,000 were converted to low density residential land. So a little bit about that smart growth that you were talking about. The low density residential land has taken up a lot of that. And from their numbers, if that acreage was still in production, it'd be $443 million of ag production every year. And then across the country, every day, 2,000 acres of ag land are paved over, fragmented, or converted to uses that jeopardize farming. And this is a number that I thought was pretty interesting because we talk a little bit about growth in the state of Georgia. For every one person added to the state's population, we lose 0.15 acres of farmland, which is kind of an interesting way to look at it. You talk about growth in numbers and populations in Georgia, and our neighbors in Florida and other parts of the country are dealing with that too. But that's just an interesting way to look at it. And this is a map. I'm sure they'll have that as well, but I just wanted to show it to you in case they didn't. But I found that to be super interesting about the conversion of agricultural lands to housing and low density residential and different things like that. But you can see it's probably the areas that you assumed it was. And if you're in this part of the world, you start seeing it creep into that. And this number is from 2016. You know what's happened over the last, I guess that's 8 years ago. It's gotten even what I consider to be worse. I don't know if anybody would consider that better or not, but I think it's gotten worse in a lot of parts of the state. And down where I'm from in Upson County, where our cattle farm is, we're seeing a lot of that growth. And then we're also seeing people move up from Florida that are buying recreational properties, and they're taking farmland that used to be productive, and they're turning into hunting properties and other things like that that'll never produce any more ag products. And so I consider that be a loss of ag land as well. So why is it so important? Our farmers aren't just producing food. It's really about national security. We hear that a lot. We hear national security. And really, I think it's about independence. We talk about being energy independent when it comes to oil and gas. We talk about being tech independent when it comes to microchips and other stuff like that. But all those things are great, but they're not necessary. The only thing that is necessary is eating. And if you're like me, you like to eat a lot. So, I mean, we think, the ag independence is the biggest reason that preserving farmland is important, and why y'all's committee is so important. And not to mention the jobs in rural Georgia that we talked about a little while ago. So what are some of the challenges that we're facing as agriculture in the state? Rising input costs, low commodity prices, and foreign competition. I mentioned that a little bit ago when I was talking about fruit and veg production, but foreign competition really is a huge issue for us. Unfortunately, it's more of a national issue because it takes a little bit different approach to get it fixed. I believe if it was a state issue, we could fix it pretty quick. But like a lot of things, that's housed in Congress's power and some other things in Washington, D.C. But that's really one of the biggest things we're facing, not to mention labor, environmental regulations. But just on the input side, if you look from 2007 to 2023, we've had an increase of over $1 billion in expenses for on-farm production. That's a lot. And I know now we talk about numbers, and you hear what's going on the federal level and how much money we're sending here and there. So it makes these numbers not seem so bad. But if you're paying that out of your pocket, that's a big deal. If you look from 1980, and Senator Goodman, Chairman Goodman, this slide is just for you right here. I know you like to talk about the cost from other times, but I know you know these numbers by heart. But fertilizer, $90 per ton, now $500 a ton, and it's been higher than that. And it's probably higher than that now. But diesel, $1.20 to $4, and then 150 horsepower tractor went from 35 to 150. And that's probably a base model tractor too. If you get the air conditioning and some good stuff in it, it's going to be a little bit more than that. You probably have a custom record player in there so you can play Elvis, but yeah, so that's right in line with what we're talking about. I borrowed this chart from the University of Georgia, and it's the first time I'd seen it. They've taken their ag econ department Dr. Campbell and some others, I give credit to them, but they have taken the farm gate value over the last 20 years, basically, and they normalized it to the year 2020 when obviously COVID happened, just so you could see the trends of what's going on as inflation adjusted, just to say, it's easy to say we paid this in that year and now we're paying that, but with inflation and other things, it doesn't really make sense. But they normalized it here to 2020. And in that top left, you can see those gray bars, and one is 2008, which y'all know, everybody knows what happened then. Well, 2020, we all know what happened then, but that top left one is farm gate values in the state of Georgia. We're essentially, once you adjust it to inflation, we're bringing in the same amount of money as we were in 2001, but all of our costs and everything else in the world has gone through the roof. That's not a great picture. And I think you can see a couple good years that we had, 2012, 13, times like that. But really we're back down to what we were in 2001. That's not what you want to see in an industry. And the bottom right is the GDP of Georgia, again, adjusted to 2020 prices. And you see the ag economy has essentially done nothing, and the state of Georgia has gone through the roof. So that's a good picture for the state of Georgia, but it's not a great picture if you're involved in agriculture. So what's that look like when it comes to income? You probably can't see it great, but there in Georgia, essentially, let's see, 34% decrease in ag income. Sorry to you. But a 34% decrease in ag farm income in the state of Georgia. And we'll hold on and get it back up, but. All right. Projected income for this year is expected to be down $6.5 billion, and that's on top of a $35 billion decrease across the country last year. So again, not to depress everybody, this will be the end of my economic talk, and we'll get into some recommendations of what we can do as a state, but just wanted to show what our farmers are facing. I know y'all know it. I just want to make sure that everybody hears that message, because we don't want to act like things are good when they're not. I know we get accused of poor mouthing all the time, and that's good until you're really poor, and we're in that really poor place now. And it's a situation where farming needs help. We need to make sure that we have agriculture in the future. One is to protect ourselves from foreign adversaries. I mean, you see the wars that have been fought over oil and gas and different reasons around the world. Imagine if wars are fought over food and water. And that's why it's so important, because it's the only thing that we need, as President Tom McCall says, 3 times a day, right? So that's the only thing we need. But so what are some recommendations? Just make farming so profitable that using land for any other purpose besides growing food and fiber wouldn't be appealing. Now, that's the real recommendation, but that was a joke, so thank y'all for laughing. But that's really the way you preserve ag land. And until we make agriculture profitable across the board, it's going to be hard to preserve land, because families are making financial decisions for their future. When you have a young person in college and they want to come back to the farm, what conversation are you having with them? And we want to make sure as a state and as an industry that we're doing everything we can to make it profitable so that young people can come back to the farm. We always talk about the average age of a farmer, and I'm not even going to look back because people are going to think I'm talking about them, but it's probably not a young room. I hadn't looked, but I'm guessing if it's an ag room, it's not a young room. We got the great folks with FFA in the crowd. But what bothers me isn't the average age of a farmer. It's a number I heard a few months ago, is what the average age of a beginning farmer is. Do y'all have any, I know you may know, we talked about it, but any idea of what an average age of a beginning farmer would be? It's 47 years old. That's not what we need. We need it to be closer to their age, and young people getting involved coming out of college. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but most of it is the barriers to entry, how expensive it is to get involved in agriculture, how expensive farmland is, how expensive equipment is, everything that goes along with it. So that's something that we need to be looking at, is how we get young people involved. So these are some recommendations. And again, something I do not feel super comfortable with, but Chairman, you asked me for some recommendations since we're in our fourth meeting to come forward with some stuff. Some of this comes from other states. Some of it are things y'all have worked on the last couple of years that I think would help. And then some of these are just personal ideas. So don't blame anybody but me for these. But something we worked on the last couple of years is CUVA. Last year we had worked on a bill dealing with LLCs, and we talked a little bit about that in Moultrie, and allowing some non-family entities to partner together for liability purposes and other tax purposes. I think that would be something that could be helpful. Anything that you can do to make it easier to do business in agriculture will help. And then also some acreage limits. Currently a cap of 2,000 acres on CUVA. Farmers have gotten creative with that, with having land in a spouse's name or a family member's name, things like that. I don't think it'll have a huge impact to the actual acreage that's in CUVA, but I think it'll allow businesses and farmers to streamline that if we could increase that. We talked about the average size of the farm being in the 200 acres, but if you get into row crop, that's well over 1,000 or 2,000 acres, and it doesn't take much to exceed that cap. And I think that's something that we could do in the state of Georgia, and we'll just take some action to get it done. Something that came up with Hurricane Helene, and had a conversation with Senator Watson. What y'all did after Hurricane Michael is y'all actually exempted, I believe, disaster payments to farmers for that hurricane. And it's something that I think would have to be done again. And you'll say, well, if you got hit by this farm, you're not going to have any income for the year. Well, that's probably true for the year it happened in, but most likely you're going to get a disaster payment in a later year when you may have income. So I think that's something that we should look at as a state to make sure we're helping our farmers. And that came up to me. Our farm got hit by a tornado in 2020, I believe, and was happy to get a little bit of some disaster help. But when I did, I was shocked to find out that I then owed income taxes to both the state and the federal government on it. So it's something that has a real impact to a farmer when they're dealing with such a bad problem. And the last thing, not the last thing, I have a couple more slides, but on this page, invest in ag innovation. I told Donald Kirkland I'd give him a shout out wherever he is, but Georgia Tech does a lot of the work in ag innovation. There you go. That's for you too. But some of the work that's going on at the University of Georgia, at Georgia Tech, at ABAC, at Fort Valley, I mean, it's some really wonderful work that's going on. But there's no limit to how much can be invested there. If we're talking about ag in the future, it's going to be a tech play. It's going to be something that we have to, if we're going to squeeze another pound of cotton out of an acre, it's going to come from technology and efficiencies and things like that. So I think that's what we could do as a state to continue to help. This one may be controversial, but it's something that I've thought about for a long time. Is there's really not much y'all can do to help a farmer. The gratuities clause kind of limits y'all when it comes to direct payments. When it comes to any type of assistance on disasters directly to a farmer, the gratuity clause kind of stops that in its tracks. So I think it's something worth having a conversation about. Even before this, I think there's things that we could do with a state level EQIP program, or, a lot of states use their tobacco settlement to increase agricultural production in different ways. We used it in, downtown redevelopment and other things that are good. But I think probably because of the gratuities clause, we weren't able to do much with agriculture with it. But I think it's something to look at if there's exemptions, and that would take obviously a constitutional amendment. But I think if there's ever a time to do it, now would be the time after our biggest hit to ag we've ever had. Again, supporting new farmers and increasing land access. What are we going to do to make sure these young folks in FFA stay involved in agriculture, and investing in their education and making capital easier for them to get involved in, I think are going to be important. And I'll leave the incorporating state planning and local planning into probably other experts that know more about it. But I think you're right. When we talk about growth in the state of Georgia, agriculture has to be a part of that conversation when it comes to economic development and housing, and, any municipalities, any of that planning really needs to have a focus in agriculture. Again, I'll leave some of these to other folks, but prioritizing high value farmland, Something that they did in recent years was that PACE program. I know a lot of y'all played a part in that, but funding that. Last year, y'all put $2 million into Georgia's Farmland Preservation Fund. Other states are putting hundreds of millions of dollars into those type of funds. And you really had to think about it. If you're looking at a farm up here, and this is total guessing, but just based off of what property values probably are, with $2 million that was put into that fund, it might preserve one small size farm. We need hundreds of millions of dollars, and we need to figure out how to go get matching federal funds and private dollars so that fund can really take off and really preserve ag land like we want it to. And then we talked a little bit about, Senator, you mentioned the foreign adversary bill last year, and somebody mentioned private equity groups. I think we need to look at private equity groups. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying in general we shouldn't, because you get into property rights and people being able to sell land to who they want to. But if we're looking at foreign countries, do we know who's a part of all of these groups that are purchasing land? Do we know who all their investors are? Do we know what their long-term goals are with that ag land? So I think it's something, maybe take the last step. And the last one is just something that I wouldn't be the president of the Georgia Agribusiness Council if I didn't bring up, but tort reform. I think it's something that we need to bring up and look at. If you're involved in any industry, I think lawsuit reform is going to be a big part of staying in business in the future, and something that y'all should consider and hopefully support when it comes up, because there's several things that go on in agribusiness that are problems for us there. So those are kind of my recommendations. Again, just kind of a wrap up of what we talked about. It needs to be a national independence issue, a national security issue. And that 2050 number, we're going to have to increase food production by 60% to meet global demand. So I don't think we need to be allowing our farmland to go away for different things that aren't going to be quite as important as food and water are. And then again, one more quote there. This comes from John Dutton, a good rancher. Reminds me a little bit of the chairman there sometimes, but he said it's talking about land. It said his values comes from knowing that if someone had all the money in the world, this is what they'd buy. And that's talking about ag land specifically, and why it's so valuable that people that have all the money in the world, what's the first thing they buy is ag land. So I think it's pertinent that y'all are taking up this issue. Appreciate y'all doing that and working on that. And then I'll close with this: is a fed man has many problems, but a hungry man only has one. So appreciate y'all letting me be here. That kind of wraps up anything I had to say, but happy to answer any questions if y'all have any.
Thank you. Thank you, Will. Great presentation. Any questions from the panel?
Uh-oh.
Will, I've said a lot of times that our nation's farm policy in terms of the regulatory environment is pretty hypocritical, right? We make our farmers buy Tier 4 engines, but then we make those farmers compete against countries where they can run Tier 1 engines. In labor reform, in H-2A labor, it's gone up 22% in the last 2 years. But yet we make our farmers compete with countries where they pay $1 or $1.50 an hour. We see that on environmental standard, with a lot of pesticides that are used and things like that, that the American farmer isn't able to use some of the same products. Can you speak to that a little bit in terms of what the American farmer is dealing with? Because we talk about. I was on a Zoom call with several state legislators, and one of them was from New York, and the one from New York was talking about all the policies that they were putting on their farmers concerning global warming and emissions and all this kind of stuff and farming practices. And I said, politely, I said, I want to come to you from my point of view of where we're at. And she said, you sound like, after I was done, she said, you sound like some of my farmers. She said, but talking about the different regulations in Canada, but what do you want to do? People want cheap food. And of course, there are a lot of things that I wanted to say to that, but I kept my mouth shut. But at the end of the day, and what you're talking about, we have to decide if we're going to keep the American family farm in business. Because if you don't, what's going to fill that void? It's going to be private equity, institutional investors, and corporations. And then when you fast forward 40 years and it's consolidated to the point that we've got 3 or 4 corporations that are basically controlling our food supply, when they get to be too big to fail, it's going to cost a whole lot more than the 1/100th that we spend. We spend 1/100th on farm safety nets of what we spend on national defense. So we as a country have to ask ourselves, and we're already seeing it in my industry, in my co-op, we sell 40% of the blueberries that are grown in Georgia, well, about 47%. And over half of the farms in our co-op now are former family farms that are owned by private equity. So we have to ask ourselves, who do we trust to feed this country? The farmers in your neighborhood and in your county and your communities, or the suits walking up and down Wall Street? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, amen. You know, that felt like a question statement that I get sometimes from from friends, but I mean, I don't know how to add to that, to be honest, Chairman. I think that's kind of spot on, and I don't think any of us, especially in the agribusiness world, are afraid of competition. I think that competition is good for consumers. I think ultimately, when you have that true competition, it's good for everybody. We're not competing on a level playing field at all when you talk about around the world. We are, in a lot of cases, competing on a level playing field in this country. And sometimes we even have advantages because we think our legislature and our agencies have been a little bit more sensible than some of our neighbors and other things when it comes to environmental regulations and regulating inputs and chemicals and stuff like that. So, you know, I don't think we have a problem with competing against other states. What we're having trouble competing with are what's going on in Mexico with specifically fruit and vegetables when you talk about cotton and South America and China and India and things like that. So I think people in our country like to feel good. And so they like to put all these regulations on us so they feel good about food production and fiber production. But what they don't realize is the rest of the world's not worried about how they feel. They're worried about feeding their people. And we sometimes just worry about how we feel and don't think about, well, if we hurt this American farmer, that food's still got to be produced. People still got to eat. So they're just going to produce it somewhere else. So we had to decide in a country, do we want to allow our farmers to grow it here, or do we want to ship it in from overseas or across the border? And that's what you're really talking about when it comes to over-regulating farmers and businesses. It's not stopping a farming practice. We grow it the safest, the healthiest, the most environmentally consciously in the world. But sometimes our decision makers forget that if you continue to make it so expensive, you talk about people just want cheap food. They're going to get cheap food, but it's going to come from somewhere else in the world. They're not worried about Tier 4 engines. They're not worried about the chemicals they use. They're certainly not worried about their labor practices. So I think we need to keep that in mind as decisions are made on that, and stop worrying about how we feel about different things and worry about what the realities are.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So a couple of comments just real quick. So I assume, over probably even before my time, y'all have kind of gotten into the weeds, probably with Chairman Goodman or before Chairman Goodman's time. Like you said, there are things that we can control. There are things we can't control. All the way down to the fees, the taxes, the amount of licensing that has to go on in terms of, able to, operate a farm and those things. Do you feel like as we go through this, and I know this is kind of in your world of, efficiency for the farmer, are there more things you think we should look at or do or, eliminate? I know that's a loaded question. You don't have to answer it right now, but to make life easy for the farmers, we kind of go through this exercise over the next weeks and months. Maybe some things that some people have just been afraid to talk about that right now could literally stop one of Russ's neighbors or, business leaders in South Georgia from maybe, it's the difference between bankruptcy and coming back. I don't know. I don't know the answer to these questions,
Yeah.
but are there's those types of things working with Commissioner Harper we need to maybe take a second or even third look at just right at this moment in time?
I think honestly, y'all are hamstrung a lot of times by the gratuities clause. I think that you can't respond quickly enough to the needs of a disaster situation just because of the realities of that. I mean, I think y'all do a good job. I think obviously Commissioner Harper does a great job and has been visible and been visiting farms and getting with the people and doing everything he can. And I think that, you know, our leadership at the top of the state with the governor has been great. But the realities are a lot, the problem is so big that it takes beyond a state response. And a federal response is needed when it comes to something so big as the devastation caused by this hurricane. But I think being engaged, like y'all have been, when there's issues that come up within agencies, USDA, you know, there's so many different subgroups under USDA that have an impact on disaster response. I think being engaged with that to make sure they know what the needs are. A lot of times they're not trying to be harmful to the situation. They just they don't understand a state with 159 counties. You know, a lot of the people are probably from states that have huge counties and might have 30 or 40 of them in a state, but we have 159 and each one of them is pretty unique. So I think just being engaged in that is key. You know, making sure y'all have a lot of power when it comes to getting people to act. You know, we write letters, make visits, and that's great, and we can make them aware. But if y'all do it, it's a certain level of urgency. So.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll just close with this. I mean, I think, you know, we go through these worldly events like we've seen in Georgia the last 5-10 years, 2 huge storms, you know, on top of pandemic, on top of this, on top of that. You know, I do think, you know, as leaders in general, not leaders in this room, but leaders in general, you know, we'll take the tools, the laws, the regs as they are, and just continue to, you know, figure out, okay, how do we solve this storm happen under this set of circumstances? And I do think, to your point, Will, and what I'm about to say is maybe controversial, but, you know, farmers, in terms of kind of the founding of this state, were, you know, really instrumental in terms of, I think, where we're at today. And even as we want to go back and look at the Georgia Constitution. And I do think that if we're going to, you know, be hamstrung because Congress will never, we can't even get Congress to act on changing the, you know, the time zone thing from, you know, daylight to whatever. I mean, they can't even solve that problem. So if we're going to ask them to solve a real problem, I think at some point we need to have a discussion, a national discussion, or even a state discussion of how do we inherently give our state, selfishly our state of Georgia, the power and the tools to help our people. And I think we need to go through this exercise and have a real discussion and have this policy debate, you know, in the legislature. And I do think, you know, there are some things that, you know, people probably wanted to change that gratuities clause for other reasons that are probably highly inappropriate. But I think if it's a matter of fact as relating to putting food on the table, helping the #1 industry in the state sustain, and we're also protecting ourselves against foreign adversaries like China. If that's the argument, then I think we need to have a serious discussion and debate it in committee in January. That's my own opinion. I'm sure somebody will, you know, not the Polk County Standard, but somebody will probably write an article about me saying this right now and want to come and debate it. But if they want to debate the farmer, then let's have the debate. But that's my position.
And I agree with you 100%. And honestly, from a farm standpoint, and what y'all did after Hurricane Michael with a special session, went back in and funded basically bridge loans and allowed farmers low interest loans to get back on their feet quickly, because that disaster payments from the federal government, it took 2 years. And we were in better economic times on the farm than if you have a 2-year delay in recovery dollars from the federal government this time, you're going to lose thousands of farms in the state of Georgia. They were already on the brink of going out of business. And if you delay that by 2 years, like happened last time, they're going to be gone. And so you're going to see just the loss of a lot of farmers, loss of a lot of rural Georgia that depends on them. And then not to mention the economy is built around them, you know, sponsorships of little league baseball teams and car dealerships and hospitals and schools and everything will dry up because of a slow response from the federal government. So I agree with you.
Thank you. Senator Beach.
Yeah, Will, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for what you do for the agricultural business. My question is, well, I hate that we're losing so much farmland, but the one thing that really shocked me was when you said the average age of a new farmer is 47 years old. My question to you is, are we working with University of Georgia and ABAC and these colleges that are from the College of Agriculture to try to place these 22, 23-year-old kids and get them into the farming and agriculture industry? Or do they just get an agriculture degree and go work somewhere else? I mean, what are we doing to incentivize these young kids and not wait till they're 47 to try to become involved in the agriculture business?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are doing a lot there. I mean, I think programs like FFA and 4-H are instrumental in that. A few years ago, y'all put ag education in elementary schools, which starts the process there. Obviously, our university system schools have been excellent in that. I think we could use more funding for the College of Ag. I think Extension Service could use a lot more funding. Both of those are things that takes a lot of money. I think y'all have a colleague that says something like trains run on coal and campaign runs on gold or something like that. I think Extension Service is the same way. And the more gold you put into that, the better it is for our industry to have not just ag agents in every county, which is 100% needed, but we have a lot of specialist positions that are open. One reason is finding qualified talent. When we do find them, can we compete with other states that have Extension Service to get them? So I think things like that, and not to get away from the original question, but I do think there's a lot of stuff, a lot of activity going on towards getting young people involved, but the realities are the cost. I certainly don't expect the average age of a new farmer to be 21, because that's not realistic of having the capital and access to that to start a business the size of farming. But we don't want it to be 47. I was shocked when I heard that.
But let me follow up on that question. If someone has a farm of 1,000 acres and their kids don't want to come back, do they hire somebody right out of to come back and help keep the family farm going, or
Yeah.
how's that work? Or do they sell their farm? Or
I mean, a lot of times if they have no family member coming back, they probably look at liquidating that asset. I mean, it's a lot easier not to farm that land when farmland is extremely valuable, and if they're not going to pass it on to the next generation and they're ready to retire, they really have no option there. So I think it is a chance for us to look at, are there programs where we connect young people that want to get involved in farming with that retiring farmer, and something that we could certainly do a better job of how do we connect somebody that's kind of aging out and trying to get out of it with somebody that's coming into it and wants to get involved. Whether that's lease to own type things on a farm, but the realities are, if somebody's knocking on your door with a huge check and you're ready to retire and you don't have family members to pass it on to, it's hard to turn that down.
thank you.
Just wanted to add one thing. Statistic that I heard from President McCall the other day, there are more farmers over the age of 65 than there are farmers under the age of 65.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to highlight that fact. What will we be talking about if we were referring to teachers or doctors
Right.
with that statistic?
Yeah. And that's the reality for myself and my farm. I came out of school and worked other places and still work other places because our farm's not big enough to support another family on it. So that's the realities of agriculture, is having an in-town job to be able to pay for that farm. And that's what I did before I purchased my first farm, was work, roughly 15 years before I could finally afford it. But that was in my mid 30s versus my late 40s. And I think we need to figure out ways to make access to capital easier.
Thank you, Will. Great presentation. Thank you so much. I forgot to tell y'all at the very beginning, we got a sign up sheet over here. So we will allot up to 5 minutes after our designated speakers speak. So please don't hesitate to sign up. We need your opinion. We need to listen. We want to listen to y'all. And Senator Goodman, thank you for that question about teachers. We actually do have a study committee going on now. Senator Dixon and I do, on teacher retention. Why are people not going into education? And why are people getting out of education? So same situation with farmers. Why are people not going into farming, and why are people getting out of farming? That's a big thing. Our next speaker, we've heard from her before, and we're bringing her back for return engagement. Catherine Moore, which is president of Georgia Conservancy. Her title is Georgia Now and Forever: Conservation Considerations for Georgia Farmland. Thank you, Catherine, for being here.
So thank you for getting me set up. This has all been very serious, so I'll add, I hope, a moment of levity. Is anyone else upset about how much older they are than Will Bentley since he gave us his birth year? That was really upsetting, Bill. Will. I thought we were a little bit closer in age, but oh, you're younger than I am. So good morning. My name is Catherine Moore, as introduced. I'm president of Georgia Conservancy. For context, for my remarks and some of the data, I just wanted to let you all know, if you're not familiar, as well as the audience here today and online, if you're not familiar with Georgia Conservancy, we are among the state's oldest conservation nonprofits. We were founded in 1967, so we're approaching our 60th birthday or anniversary, and we were founded by Georgians to focus on the issues of natural resources in our state. My background, Will was talking about the communities and kind of the ripple effects and the secondary and tertiary jobs related to farming. I went to college on loblolly pine proceeds. My father was the large animal veterinarian in my hometown. So this speaks to me, and I would not have had the opportunities I have had as a professional and my family has experienced without the foresters and the farmers in my hometown. Our presentation is called Georgia Now and Forever. I think the through line of Will's presentation, and we did not coordinate, so you're going to see some great, not duplication, but I think important reiteration of ideas. But the through line from his remarks, and I think as well as mine, and that's why I mentioned the age of Georgia Conservancy, is we're playing for the long game here. It was mentioned and emphasized in Will's remarks about the investment and the years of investment as well as money in our crops. And that's the way that we have to think about our land. So this title today is so incredibly important. It's about Georgia's natural assets now and its land, as well as much, much further, decades, generationally down the road from now. The first half of my presentation, or the first third, is going to include some data. I'd like to acknowledge our friends at Georgia Tech, essentially their GIS center that worked with Georgia Conservancy starting about maybe 6 years ago now in looking at land cover change in our state. So looking at national satellite imagery from 1974 through 2021, we worked with them to figure out what has changed in Georgia, where has it changed, and why has it changed? Now, I don't want to embroil Georgia Tech with the final part of my presentation in case they would disagree when I get to some ideas and recommendations. So I just want to cite them as being partner to some of the data creation. If you don't like some of the things at the end, you can blame me and not them. So what I'd like to, there you go. Exactly. So what I'd like to cover is just a reminder. We all know this. Georgia's growing, and it's growing fast in terms of population as well as that developed land cover. I want to give you some particulars around that. Then I want to share for you, this is the part where our organization comes in, what we think that change means in terms of goals that we think a lot of Georgians can get behind regarding our future. And then finally, I'd like to offer you some ideas about some action items going forward, or some potential actions going forward. So let's look at this. And Will touched on several data points, and I think our numbers generally agree if they're not exactly the same. But we know that this is the state that we have. At Georgia Conservancy, we like to say that every acre matters. Every acre matters because it needs to do something for our people, for our ecology, and for our economy. So if we're going to ask of our state to provide all of these needs, house us, provide recreation opportunities, provide food, protect habitat, provide for our quality of life, then we need to be good stewards of our land. And that's going to get increasingly more challenging as our population continues to grow. You see these figures from OPB, and these are the population projections from 2023 to 2050. And you see what OPB is sharing as to the counties that they anticipate are going to see the greatest amount of change in the sense of growth. They are showing some counties that are going to decline in terms of population. But how will those counties manage that growth? How will they apply their own perspective of every acre matters when that county's land needs to provide all those services? And then again, writ large as a state, how are we going to maintain all that we do here for food and fiber with those additional population impacts? Now your eye, I hope, will go to kind of that middle image. You see the outline of the state of Georgia, and it'll rotate as I talk. But it is showing you from 1974 to 2021, a bunch of red dots. Those red dots reflect developed land cover. Now it's everything from like a rural subdivision, large lot zoning type of situation to a golf course, all the way to industrial warehouse, high-rise buildings in downtown Atlanta. But the big takeaway is that developed land in Georgia has increased significantly. And by our data, we have that land cover type encompassing all those ways that you might think of developed land to 2.9 million acres. So there's 2.9 million acres of developed land in Georgia that in 1974 and prior was something else. Could have been farm, could have been timber, could have been natural lands. And so it's not so much that maybe that number is bad, but is that what we want? It's in question about intentionality. Are we seeing the growth that we want where we want it? And if the answer's no, we've got data, we've got knowledge, and we can direct our future. And that was the point of our initiative that is also the title of my presentation today, and the work that we undertook with Georgia Tech is Georgia Now and Forever. If the lessons from our past tell us something that we're not keen on for the future, we now know that, and then we have these takeaways and we can decide what we want going forward. If you look especially away from Metro Atlanta, which I know it's hard to do because that big blob is very distracting and your eye is drawn to it. But for purposes of our conversation for the study committee, if you look at the middle of the state South, what is dramatic is our smaller urban centers and how much they've grown. And then the fragmentation that has happened of the land that is happening outside of those smaller communities because the dots are here, here, and here. Now, if you look at the other map, you see that 2021 developed land cover in all the red, and then you see on top of it green. Those are permanently protected lands in Georgia. Some of them are fee simple, some of them are conservation easements, but they all are some type of permanent protection. Could be through federal programs and federal money, all the way down to a local program and a private transaction of a property owner maybe donating an easement to some type of conservation program. That's about 10% of our state that is permanently protected. To give you a sense of what our neighbors are doing, North Carolina's got around, or our peers in the Southeast, North Carolina has about 16% of its land permanently protected. Florida, with twice the population, has around 30. So this is an area of leadership that we could decide we want to undertake, and I'll get more to that in a moment. But the reason we dropped it in on top of that developed lands map was just to, again, prompt all of us to say, is this what we want? What do we want for our future? Are we doing enough when it comes to land conservation? Now, Will was talking to us about the numbers of food and fiber. So we would argue that, as the chairman set us off this morning, that unchecked growth, unplanned growth, unintentional circumstances are the largest threats to our industries from a land perspective. I know Will talked about some of the bigger picture economic aspects that are certainly outside of my organization's mission and expertise, but in terms of the acres to do, the acres to undertake forestry and farming, the number one threat here in Georgia is that unplanned growth. So you see there, again, kind of a heat map of the counties of Georgia, the proportional change of forest loss. So you see some counties where forest acres have grown, but primarily we're seeing loss. And let me kind of jump then to the sibling of forestry, which is our ag. And you see that heat map again, where we are seeing the greatest loss of ag land. So your kind of gold, orange, and red counties are where we have seen since 1974, again through 2021, the greatest loss. And that's capturing everything from pasture all the way to, row crops and orchards. So by our numbers, about 2.6 million acres of ag land, and that's been quoted earlier this morning, have been converted from some type of ag to another land cover. And vast majority of that is low density residential. The vast majority of that is low density residential. And as has already been touched on, what's alarming about that is we're putting pavement over some of our high priority ag soils that are the most productive. So while we talked about technology and the need for that in Georgia's ag and forestry future, we also need those good soils. Nothing can replace that. So I gave you an overview of some data. Looking at about 50 years of land cover change. What's happened? Where's it happened? What's the change been? What might that mean? And now I'd like to kind of aggregate some of that in some takeaways. But let me go back 1 minute to this map. I neglected to point out that the data I have talked to you about goes through 2021. It does not reflect what has been mentioned this morning, more recent years, which we're working to capture and roll into this, this mapping and these counts, is some of the mega site developments and some of the large scale economic development projects that have come on and are coming online in Georgia. So what do those sites do to change some of these numbers? And then what do the ripple effects, especially around housing, do? And that's something you touched on, Mr. Chair, this morning. I just wanted to highlight that we're aware that that's not here. It's because we don't have the data just yet to roll it in, but it's going to change those numbers significantly. So if we understand that there has been a significant conversion of Georgia's land from some natural or farmed type of land cover to development, and we think about the future going forward, what might be some big categories of actions that we would want to undertake? So I'll share 3 with you. At Georgia Conservancy, we believe we must first, so we've got 3 goals, identify the high priority lands and then find the funding and the programs to protect them. And you see working farmlands up there at the top of the list alongside some other valuable natural assets and conditions that we'd want to protect in our land. Let me go back. There we go. Then number 2 goal, can we curb the proliferation of low intensity development? And we prefer policies and incentives. Most importantly, how can we direct growth where it should go and reduce the fragmentation of our landscapes? When we begin to fragment our landscapes, like this picture you see here, which is from Barrow County, we're fragmenting opportunities to do alternative things with those lands around them. So while I'm not here to tell you today that we should reduce housing diversity and housing choice in our state, in fact, we need to do the opposite, but we need to remind ourselves that we need to have housing choice in our community. Large lot zoning and single family houses don't work for just everybody or aren't desired. So let's make sure that our zoning, our regulations, our political priorities, and the understanding at the local level is that housing diversity is good. Quite often, we find that communities around the state will approach us as growth is coming their way, population is increasing, they'll get alarmed. And so a knee-jerk reaction is to go to a large lot zoning type of situation to reduce the growth. Grass and some oak trees in your front lawn are not the same as timber, as natural forest, or as ag land. And so I just point out that difference. And I think this approach to housing feels good. It feels that a community is staying green. It feels that the growth is not impacting them too much. But in actuality, it's increasing the cost of community services for whether it's the county or the city, the underlying government. And again, it's fragmenting the landscape that could have been doing and probably was doing something else prior. And then goal 3, tied to that number 2 there, is reminding every community across the state that I read from a few moments ago, especially as I was trying to draw your eye to some of the smaller, more rural communities. Every decision in every community has led to that red and that growth. And we think about the hyperlocal situations, and we know that folks get very emotional in their communities about change and what's happening downtown or what's happening, outside a highway such and such. But it is that local decision in aggregate that is increasing the amount of developed land and the sprawl, in fact, across our state. And that's hindering some other things that we want, especially as we think about the long term. The greatest opportunity in our communities is incentivizing reuse, redevelopment, and infill. We have a lot of good land that's already been provided with infrastructure. The original value has already been minimized because of that development in terms of kind of ecological services. So let's have that land. Let's have those acres continue to provide service in the future. And that's something that we've gotten away from, is we tend to have a variety of regulations, zoning and subdivision opportunities and so forth that just make it so much easier and cheaper to do greenfield development. It is harder to do redevelopment. So if I've given you an overview of the data, of how Georgia has changed in about 50 years, and I've given you kind of three goal buckets, three kind of categories of things, the reason that action is so important, as I segue to some specific ideas, is because business as usual is going to look something like this. So if, based on our data developed with Georgia Tech, if the way that the counties have been operating and developing land, and I don't mean this to say that this is the county government's fault or anything like that, I'm just using that as a geographic boundary description. If the way that our communities have been growing is going to continue in the future, what is going to happen is that we are going to have counties where we've got 12% all the way to more than 70% of their land area is going to be of a developed land cover type. Is that making sense? So now that you may think, well, gee, that's not that bad. There's a lot more of that kind of mint green than there is the oranges and golds. But that is almost the entire northern half, middle half of our state up, that is going to be somewhere from, again, 12.5% to 70% developed. And once you've put that impervious surface on the ground, it's not going to be taken up. It's not going to be rewilded. It's not going to be recaptured for forest or for farms or some other type of ecological service. So this is what we project to be business as usual. And then you could continue to play that out into the future. We went out to 2030 and then 2060 on this map. I just don't know that this is sustainable for the purposes of food and fiber, which we've all agreed this morning are major industries. And so if we are willing to make significant investments to recruit new jobs and new opportunities in our state, I think we should argue that we should do as much or more to protect and encourage the existing industries that are here in our state. And I think farmland conservation is directly a part of that. If we can address some of the pressures that are on our farmers in terms of others that are interested in their land, then we've provided them one resource in that complicated equation that ends up making or not making money for them year over year. So that's, again, what I'm here to speak to, is not some of the more complicated things that is Will's specialty, but this farmland protection and land protection approach. So let's think about some specific opportunities. It's already been mentioned that you all, and I'd like to thank Senator Goodman for sponsoring Senate Bill 220, and for you all for supporting it. It had extreme positive response in the Georgia General Assembly, and certainly our governor signed it. So in 2023, we established for the first time in Georgia a farm conservation focused program. And it is amazing who we are as a state that we did not, prior to 2023, have such a program on the books. What this program does is provide an incentive for farming landowners. It's a voluntary program. If a farming landowner, especially in an area of development, and a farming landowner who has some of those prime ag soils would like to participate in the program, it provides a cash payment for certain development rights that they may decide to give up. So it's recognizing that their land is valuable, it has an asset, but that it should stay, if they want it to, it should stay in farming. The big components of this program that get lost sometimes in the detail is it provides an opportunity to draw down federal dollars. For example, the state of Delaware, little bitty Delaware against big Georgia in terms of acres, over several years of their farmland conservation program's been in operation for several decades. They've drawn down around 60 million federal dollars. Little Delaware, 60 million federal dollars that they've drawn down because they established their state program. So when we have a state program, it becomes a component of what can happen with those federal dollars. The farmers get more money, our state dollars go further, and the federal dollars go further. It also presents an opportunity for the philanthropic community to step forward. We know from several decades of successful conservation in Georgia, I showed you that map of permanently protected land, about 10% of Georgia's land. We know that the philanthropic community will step up when asked, but they've focused on farms, on wildlands, wetlands, other things. Let's ask them to step up and contribute to farmland conservation. So this program will begin to do that. And again, I certainly appreciate the support of the General Assembly in passing that, and certainly our Ag Commissioner for having the vision to bring that forward. What is needed now, though, is that consistent funding source. Will mentioned that we've just had $2 million as a line item. Our other states around us and elsewhere geographically in the country, they are tapping into things like the real estate transfer tax, certain sales taxes, other type of self-imposed taxes to fund their programs. Some are doing it just as a line item appropriation. But just off the top of my head, and you heard mentioned already that Florida is committing somewhere between 100 to 300 million a year on their farmland. We know that some other states are doing 20, 15 million, 30 million a year. So that's certainly within our reach to have a robust, dedicated funding source that could move the needle on that program. And let me kind of jump forward. Just a few more things. This is a slide detailing the federal program that is administered through the NRCS, and it is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, ACEP, and it has kind of two arms or two areas of focus, and the one that is relevant here, or directly relevant, is the Agricultural Land Easement, ACEP ALE. So that is the program by which Georgia could bring to bear its state program dollars to draw down those federal dollars. And again, it saves us money, gets more money in the farmers' hands, and over the long haul, more acres are protected. The robustness of this program would require robustness of our program. So I just wanted to draw your connection between this federal arm and this state arm. And I want to just leave you with a few more thoughts. I skipped one of my slides because I want to get to just a few final things here and make sure I have time for them. The state of Georgia has invested in a variety of different tax incentives for landowners. We're very well aware of CUVA and FLIPA, which have been helpful to those forest or farmland owners. Those programs could be expanded in terms of the amount of reduction, reduce the assessed value for the active ag land. They could be goosed a little bit, if you will, to do even more good. And that's a good thing because we already know how to do that. And the word is out about those programs. So there's a way to kind of goose the impact of those programs a little bit. And as it relates to the potential to really take this newer farmland protection program to the robustness that it could go, we have to be mindful that our counties sometimes push back or have a little hesitancy around this concept of, well, gosh, land's being taken off my tax digest. We understand that because those counties still have to provide schools, public safety, pipe, roads, et cetera. So what some states do, including the state of Florida, with a certain parameter, if a county meets a certain set of circumstances in terms of their socioeconomic standing and some other things, and they have a certain amount of acreage in a type of conservation protection program, there's a payment then to the county. So a payment in lieu of taxes. And we already do that a little bit with FLIPA. So just be aware, and I know you already are, but we can get pushback from county leadership. And it's not that they don't believe in conservation. And you all know that. They're just trying to make their books work at the end of the day. And there's a leadership opportunity for the state of Georgia with that. And there's states that haven't invoked such programs because they've had their own concerns at the county level around that. This was mentioned already, and I was so appreciative of Will and the Agribusiness Council for, as a planner myself, of being aware that we do need to plan well, and we need to execute on those plans. So there's a couple of ways you could go about that. The transfer of development rights has been on the books as a legal mechanism here in Georgia. We've not, for a variety of reasons, we've not had really robust programs at the local level around that, but it is possible. The city of Madison uses a TDR program already pretty successfully. And if you're not familiar, that's a program where you have land that you want to protect, and that becomes your sending area. You can buy development rights from certain areas that are geographically delineated, and you can send them to other areas of a community, be it a county or a city that can handle some more density or additional growth. So sending and receiving areas, and you're buying and trading on rights. And again, the city of Madison has been pretty successful in doing that. You can have urban growth boundaries or just a limit to an urban service area. Newton County was doing this for quite a while. They had established, because of some physical conditions in their county, how far out they were or were not going to provide sewer and water. And they did that intentionally, especially on the eastern side of the county, to protect some of their ag lands and some of those soils out there. So that is very possible. And I think you all remember the Georgia Green Space Program for a good many years ago. There could be parallel models with counties that have certain attributes. The state could determine to set up incentives for those counties through some of their own mechanisms and means, and they could utilize the Georgia Farmland Conservation Program to identify and secure a certain percentage or a certain goal of protection in their county, and the state could support that. So we have done that as a state before, and not that distant past. So again, just kind of landing on the fact that planning is a tool in all of this. And we're all aware of the water wars. And I think farm conservation goes alongside our forest conservation and our wildlife conservation to demonstrate that the state of Georgia is a good steward of its resources. And we can do those things regionally. Will mentioned the potential to plan for farming protection. We know where we need to protect our farms. We know where those high value soils are. All of our local communities have some type of comprehensive plan that has an element of green space planning to it, and they all have their agricultural zoning. So we know where these lands are. It is investing in really these three buckets: the incentives for farm owners, for landowners to protect their land, incentives for local communities to do it, the policies that set that framework and those priorities in place, and then the land planning coordination, especially at a regional level when you're thinking about something like corridors, larger acreages, and water, especially. That coordination is key. So I would just leave you that I don't have the silver bullet in the sense of the one brand new aha thing that no one's thought of already in Georgia, and I'm able to bring that to you today. But the good news is I'm saying we have the tools in our toolbox already. We have to decide to invest in the programs, establish the incentives, and then at the local level, which is beyond this study committee's purview, is that we need our local leaders and our folks that show up at county commission meetings and city council meetings to understand that a yard, large lot zoning, that is not the conservation the way that they may think it is in terms of protecting their community's sense of character. It is through these other mechanisms that we're going to keep our forests, we're going to keep our tree canopy, we're going to keep our working lands. So that's it. I can take some questions, and I would like to offer, as you all continue to wind down, the chair mentioned you all are going to have one more meeting. We'll continue to be here as the Georgia Conservancy to be of service in any way that we can as you narrow down on your recommendations and next steps.
Thank you. Thank you also for using the word land use planning and not zoning. The word zoning is an awful word, and when we talk, people just go berserk over that. But when you talk about land use planning, it's a big deal too. The slide that you had up there that intrigued me about Bullock County was the slide of 2060, that 12 and a half to 20, yeah, right there. Now, does that slide include Hyundai?
It does not.
No, I didn't think so. Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
No,
okay.
thank you for emphasizing that.
So in our county, we got Bullock County and Effingham, and then right below it is Chatham and Bryan, I guess, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And so
So-
the intention, yes, sir, is when we get, so all of the things I've shown you, including this, which is a projection, so goes through 2021 in the past, and then this one was taking the business as usual from around 2018 to 2021 and just playing that out, assuming kind of the same pace, the same rate of change and the same type of change, what would that look like in the future? So you're exactly right. When you add some more data points, you have to adjust that projection. And so we would imagine that we would see some more of that red and orange.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just for point of clarification, the federal match, I know you're talking about how much Delaware would pull down, but it's a dollar for dollar match. Is that correct?
Give or take, the way this works is for the NRCS program, and I would like to brag on Georgia's NRCS leadership. We have among the best in the nation. They move their applications as quickly as possible through the program. I provided some leave behind information for you all that I hope you have. If you don't, I'll resend it. But you'll see some indications about the time frame that it takes for a lot of states NRCS application processes. Our state is much more efficient than that. So I just wanted you all to be aware of the talented folks that we have access to here in our state. So your question is, the way that that's broken down is typically NRCS will pay about 50% of an easement value. If there's a state program, it'll pay around 25%. And then a property owner might be asked to donate or have kind of a bargain sale or just not realize that final 25% of their land. So when we have a state program, that farmer is getting a little bit more. They're not just getting the federal money and then having to kind of donate or not receive the full value of the remainder. We're able to step it up. So in some cases, depending on the situation and all the way that the capital stacking could happen, the underlying property owner is going to receive a pretty significant and robust, it's within fair market value, but we want it to be a robust competitive offer when we know that they're receiving offers from developers for other things. So that's where the state money comes in, is it stacks on top of the federal money. They're actually putting in more, the feds are.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you for the
Good.
opportunity.
Catherine, thank you so much. Very, very good. Mallory? There she is. Okay. Mallory Osteen is the Georgia Program Manager of the American Farmland Trust. And the title is A Look at Farmland Protection Policy Opportunities in Georgia and Comparison Examples. And Will and Catherine, they gave us a lot of homework for our chairman right here. And we look forward to Mallory giving us a lot more homework.
Hopefully not too much. Hopefully I've done some homework for you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for having me here today. I was thinking on the way over here just how wonderful this process has been and how I want to thank you for the intention and the curiosity that you brought to this. And I'm just really appreciative as a 8th generation Georgian who my roots go way back in Pierce County, actually. Georgia's agricultural industry built me into who I am today. And so I've dedicated my work to preserving it. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of what we've learned and some examples I've pulled from other states for us to look at. So a little bit about American Farmland Trust before I get started. So you may know us by our bumper sticker that you might see around called No Farms, No Food. But before it was No Farms, No Food, it was called It's Not Farmland Without Farmers. And we've been around since the 1980s. We are centered around conservation agriculture. And we have about 3 parts to our mission. That's keeping farmers on the land, promoting sound farming practices on that land, and protecting farmland. And we do that through a variety of ways, everything from on-the-ground technical assistance to some of the programs that we've mentioned earlier, to programs and education and outreach, to research and to policy efforts as well. So some of the numbers that we've been talking about, that Will talked about earlier, I wanted to highlight as well, and I'll go over these briefly. So American Farmland Trust has a research initiative called Farms Under Threat, where we track farmland conversion across the U.S. and over time. And in 2020, we released a report called State of the States, Farms Under Threat, and it compared states and how much farmland has been lost between 2001 and 2016. Across the nation, we lost 11 million acres, and in Georgia, we lost a little over 500,000. But what's important to note is how we ranked compared to other states in that report. And in that report, Georgia ranked 5th in the nation in farmland loss. And the vast majority of that, as folks have mentioned, was low density residential development. So as we talk about a lot of other things to support farmers and making decisions for the future of their farm, absolutely, we have to consider low density residential development and the way that we plan for the use of our land. So we also released a study 2 years ago called Farms Under Threat 2040, where we projected out farmland conversion out to the year 2040, taking into business as usual trends, looking at what if we were to see increased sprawl, and then what if we had a better alternative that included conservation. And you'll notice here that Georgia moves up in the ranking. We're now number 4th in projected farmland conversion out to the year 2040. So we could lose anywhere from close to 800,000 to over 1 million acres of farmland in that time frame. And again, a large chunk of this will be due to low density residential development. And you can see that we're keeping good company with a lot of our southern neighbors here in this report. Oh dear, I messed them up. Sorry, I'm gonna pause real quick. I think this is still the old regulation. I think this is still the old. Sorry, we had 2 different versions and I'm just making sure we have the right one before we go forward. Yeah. So this. Thank you so much. I had a version earlier on Friday and then I made some edits and I just wanted to make sure my memory and talking points were on point with the presentation.
But you said that Georgia is ranking 4th on loss of farmland.
Projected loss of farmland, correct.
All 50 states.
All 50 states, yes, sir. So a snapshot of that and what that looks like and what that means. So on a business as usual trajectory, that's close to 800,000 acres of farmland we'll see converted. 44% of that is projected to be on nationally significant lands. So our soils that are most resilient, give us the highest yields and are most suited to agriculture. That's the equivalent of 7,200 farms, $756 million in farm output, and over 10,000 jobs. And some of the hardest hit counties we're going to see are likely Jackson, Henry, and Hall. And again, these are projections. So I think it's important to contextualize when we think about farmland loss and farmland conversion to remember that this is the vast majority of the time, it is private land change in ownership, and it's individual farms and farm families making a decision for their future. And there's a variety of things that are coming into play as they make those decisions. So I wanted to take a look at what we have in front of us in terms of what's land changing hands. So across the nation, nearly 300 million acres, or 1/3 of our country's agricultural land, is going to transition to new ownership over the next 20 years. As an aging agricultural landowners prepare to retire, the future of the land they steward is at a critical turning point, and how and who they transfer their land to has an enormous impact on the next generation of farmers and ranchers and the opportunities available to them. So just to put a few numbers to what we were talking about earlier, you can see Georgia over here in the bright red. This chart shows the ratio of producers over 65 to the ratio of producers under 35. And in Georgia, we have 4 to 5 as many producers over the age of 65 as we do under the age of 35. So when we think about landowners and their decisions, this is coming up quick. And it's important to think about the other side of that coin, these new and beginning farmers who are trying to access land. There was a survey done by the National Young Farmers Coalition back in 2022. It surveyed 10,000 beginning farmers, and they listed their top challenge was land access. So, and that kind of runs against when we talk to, when we survey farmers who, are currently on land, they share a real desire and a real preference to transition their farm to a new and beginning farmer. However, the financial realities of that often get in the way, and often just the ways that land transfers, sometimes it's due to hardship, sometimes it's, it's in quick circumstances. There's oftentimes not the patience to, find and identify a new and beginning farmer that can, and then there's also the question of affordability. So what do we do with that? And there are a number of states, about 20 plus states, that have implemented some kind of land access policy incentive. And I'm going to go through a few examples here. But so even though farmland owners report a preference for transferring their farm to a new generation, financial realities push them to get the highest price. And this is where policy can come in. So one example I want to show is the beginning farmer tax credit. So the beginning farmer tax credit, it was first passed in Nebraska back in the late 90s. I think 2001 is when it finally went into action. And Nebraska was looking at its rural communities. Oh, awesome. And I linked a lot of what I'm talking about today. So I hopefully did some homework for you, and I'll share that afterwards. So Nebraska, and that was a bipartisan, very almost a unanimous vote effort. And they were looking at their rural communities, and they realized that if they didn't address the issue of farmland access, that was the #1 issue that they could do to support their rural communities. So they passed it almost unanimously. It had about $1 to $2 million allocated, and it's been very, very popular. Since then, a number of other states have followed suit. And all of these programs, their benefit is that they have relatively small investments for state governments. They're very popular. And every state has crafted a little differently what this looks like. What are you going to define a beginning farmer as? Does this apply to only the sale of land or the lease of land? Can this apply to other farm assets as well? And so this chart kind of breaks down, it goes in chronological order from the order that states pass these tax credits, and it shows a little bit of the differences of, is it 5% all the way to 15%? And then it even shows the annual credits awarded and the number of participants. And I want to highlight Iowa, where for $5.5 million, they have over 1,000 participants a year. So over 1,000 farmers in Iowa are accessing this program for $5.5 million to ensure that the land that they're selling is going to a beginning farmer. So this has been a very successful tool that I would recommend we consider. The second one I want to talk about is something called Farmland Purchase and Protection Incentives. We call them FPPIs. They aim to help farmers purchase the land and then protect it with an agricultural conservation easement. So these programs typically come online as an addendum or as an addition to an existing PACE program. Georgia has a PACE program. Thanks to the committee here today and a lot of the folks in this room, their hard work, we have a PACE program in Georgia that we can continue to build on. So the way these programs work is they try to address the issue of land access. How do we address the fact that farmers coming into farming can't find the capital to compete on the open market? So in Maryland and Delaware, they have no or low interest loan programs that bring additional credit to the amount a beginning farmer can get through a conventional lender. In Delaware, the mortgages for up to 70% of the property's development rights. It's a 30-year mortgage at 0% interest with a lifetime cap of $500,000. In Maryland, it's up to 51% of the fair market value, up to $500,000. And these are often funded through appropriations. They're also sometimes funded through agricultural land transfer tax. So that's something I wanted to talk about as well. So in Massachusetts, they have something called the agricultural land transfer tax, and at 5%. So every time land transfers out of agricultural use, there's a 5% tax applied to that. And then that tax goes in to fund these other programs that protect and support farmers. So how do these programs work? So this is a flow chart that kind of breaks down what that looks like. So a young farmer seeks lending from a bank and from the state at the same time. They purchase the farm and then they sell the development rights. So permanently protect their farm in perpetuity. And then and oftentimes that decreases the permanent amount that they will need to owe back on the loan. In Maryland, they do typically the same thing, but they have a quasi-government organization that does that lending for them. But the beginning farmer seeks lending from the bank and from our bidco. They purchase the land and then they sell a conservation easement back to the state within 7 years. Washington is another state I want to highlight. They have a little bit of a more of a fast acting program. Their program is really designed to be quick release and to address land that's on the open market. So in this case, they have an intermediary or land trust that are positioned to kind of take on the risk of identifying who's this beginning farmer that's really in a position to take their operation to the next level. They seek lending from the state. They identify the farmer and lease to them. They protect the land, then they sell it to the farmer at a reduced rate. And go forward. So those are a couple of options. The other one I wanted to talk about and reemphasize, as others have, is our existing purchase of agricultural conservation easement program here in Georgia. So it is a huge feat. We joined 28 other states in creating that. And it's important to think about the future of that and what we can do to ensure that it is on track and further funded for the future. So this is just a little bit of a recap of what these are. They're types of conservation easements. There are a lot of conservation easements out there. Sometimes sometimes landowners donate donate the development rights of their land completely, and sometimes they're paid for the value of those development rights. And that's what we're talking about here. And that's really important for agricultural lands because it is really hard to ask a farmer to donate the development rights of their land when they're already so strapped and when it's their most vital resource. So qualities of a strong program as we look at, what other states are doing and how much they're committing and funding. The most important thing is that funding is consistent from year to year. As you outreach and educate about this program, farmers need to know that it's available year on year and what it looks like and what the rules are so that they can plan for it. Second is that the program is funded at a high enough level to compete with ag land value, compete with regular ag land values on the open market, and leverage those opportunities to match federal and local dollars, as we talked about earlier. So in Georgia, we have 3 counties that have put up funding. We have Carroll County, well represented in this room. We have Oconee County, and Morgan County just came online. And those local counties are dedicating anywhere from $100,000 to $250,000 a year to farmland protection. So counties are really stepping up. And if they see Georgia do the same, I think we'll start to see that number of counties grow. So how do states fund these PACE programs? So we've talked about a few things. A few other cool ideas that other states are doing are conveyance fees on real estate transactions, real estate transfer taxes, vanity license plates. So in New Hampshire, they have something called the Moose Plate, where for $40, you get a vanity license plate that shows that you're committed to farmland protection, and that money goes into a fund to fund these programs. There are also things like mitigation fees on development. So that's similar to something like the agricultural land transfer tax. Anytime land is coming out of agriculture and going into development, a mitigation fee could be applied, and that could go in to fund these programs as well. And then there's also direct appropriations, capital budgets, and bonds. So benefits quantified. I wanted to share a few highlights of studies of what these state dollars what they leverage in investment. So there was a Texas study in 2019 that showed that $1 of investment in a state PACE program leveraged $10 in federal and private investment. In Pennsylvania, they did a 2019 study that showed that $1 investment in state PACE brought $2 of economic activity, specifically in the ag sector. And in 2017, Colorado did a study that showed that a $1 investment in state conservation showed a $4 to $12 public ecosystem service benefit. If this were my retirement accounts and you told me I could get that kind of investment, I would take you up on it. So I wanted to show a few of those examples of farmland protection policy incentives that other states have taken on. I want to talk a little bit about solar, and I know we've had a lot of conversation about this, and I wanted to give a little bit of additional perspective. So our Farms Under Threat study did also look at the projection of solar conversion in the U.S. And our modeling shows that if things go on course, 83% of new development of solar will be on farm and ranch land, and nearly half of that will be on our productive soils. So the difference between solar and a lot of other forms of conversion that we've talked about, when we talk about low density residential housing, when we talk about strip malls and high commercial use, that land is not going back into farming. The opportunity with solar is that it is not or need not be a permanent land use change. And so, and I know there are a lot of opportunities to prioritize other siting for solar, parking lots, rooftops, brownfields, things like that. The research shows and the growing consensus is that there are not enough suitable rooftops to meet the demand for solar. So some will be sited on farmland. So the question then is not if, but how and where. And solar development has benefits, challenges, and opportunities. One really strong benefit is the landowner lease payments. I talk to farmers all the time in Georgia and across the Southeast that say that the lease payments that they are getting from solar is what's allowing them to farm the rest of their acreage. And so in that case, it's actually solar lease payments are actually saving the remainder of their farmland. The tax revenue and the community benefits as well. Some challenges are it's prime farmland conversion. Developers can often, especially in our rural areas, they can often compete existing farm renters for land. And then utility scale solar arrays can have impacts on the farm economy. But there's an opportunity here and a good one, and that's agrivoltaic arrays. And that's the pairing of agricultural production and solar energy. So AFT has recognized that solar is coming onto farmland, and we've worked to promote policies and principles that advocate for smart solar, a term we've coined. So that thinks about things like siting. Can we prioritize siting in the built environment, contaminated land, and land not well suited for agriculture? Can we think about, even as we develop on farmland, safeguarding the ability for that land to be used for agriculture in the future? These are 20 to 30-year leases usually, and so we need to be thinking about what comes next. Third is agrivoltaics. Expand the use of agrivoltaics operations for agricultural production and solar energy on the same land. And then the fourth is shared benefits. So promote equity and farm viability in siting and permitting decisions. So we have a document that kind of goes through our state and local policy recommendations for advancing these smart solar principles. And I want to go through a few of them here, and then I'll go into the weeds a little bit more with a few others. So across these, you'll see that we recommend investing in research. There's a lot, we don't know what we don't know yet. This is a new and growing industry, and we are still learning. Another example of things other states have done is to convene and fund a lease conflict process. So identifying the lands that are best suited for solar, the lands that are best suited for agriculture, bringing everybody together and identifying where to go from there. We have a lot of good resources to start from here in Georgia. The Nature Conservancy has developed a Georgia low impact solar siting tool that considers some of our most natural resources in areas that would be more detrimental than others. It's a really good starting point to think about how that could apply to Georgia's ag lands and our prime soils. Thinking about incentives and disincentives. So when we think about anytime we think about rooftops or parking lots or all those things that allow solar, make it easier to build solar on other parts, on other areas, that's a help to farmland. Additionally, thinking about best management practices as solar is built, requiring decommissioning plans, and then I'll get more into agrivoltaics in a minute. So what are other states doing to guide how solar is developed on their landscape? New York is an example of a state that has developed, the Department of Agriculture set out mandatory guidelines that consider agricultural lands. So it goes into the environmental monitoring process, soil testing before you get started, what you do with the topsoil, how you cover crop that in the winter, and then what decommissioning should look like specifically on ag lands. The other thing to think about is decommissioning. So decommissioning is, these are typically, solar developments are typically 20 to 30-year leases, and then that site may need to be decommissioned. So there are about 4 different ways that states have approached decommissioning policies. One is local option. So that's where counties have full say over what they do or do not require or expect with decommissioning. The second is localities still have all the authority, but there's a state guidance in place that that counties can implement if they need support. And then the other option is a statewide mandated guidance policy type, with the option for local counties to go stricter, or for that statewide policy to be in place, and it's only put into place in lieu of existing local regulations. And then the fourth, and this is the most popular, the most states who have passed anything on decommissioning have passed this, which is the statewide mandate on what decommissioning looks like. And that goes into, and that's an opportunity for a state to decide, what do we mean by decommissioning? What do we mean by putting the land back where we found it? Does that mean, cutting off the poles at the ground level? Or does that mean pulling them all the way out? There's a whole process that can be gone through to see what we mean in Georgia for that. So I want to get into a little bit more about agrivoltaics. Why do we keep talking about it? And why is it so important to consider? So one of the reasons is when we poll people about their impressions and their opinions of solar siting, agrivoltaics gets the highest positive attitudes. People are really excited about the opportunities of agrivoltaics. When you think about agrivoltaics and what it means to consider that at a state level, you want to see you'd be looking for areas in existing policy where you can incentivize agrivoltaics to be a better option than a traditional siting. So the first start would be to come up with a strong qualifying definition of what counts as agrivoltaics. So some states can, they say pollinator habitat. We just want to expect that you cover the ground underneath the panels with pollinator habitat and things like that. Other states have stricter requirements. You need to be producing an agricultural product throughout the life of the array. So AFT is actually coming up with our own definition. We're going to have that out in a couple of weeks, so I'm happy to share that. But we also want to encourage research and performance monitoring and compliance. You should periodically kind of check up on and report on those and encourage a diversity of agrivoltaics projects. So the most common that you'll see is sheep underneath solar panels. The reason for that is it's really easy to kind of keep the arrays as they would typically be built and incorporate sheep. They're great lawnmowers. That vegetation has to be managed. And we have lots of examples here in Georgia where farmers are able to expand their livestock operations without purchasing land, which is the most difficult piece of the operation, by working with solar developers to graze their sheep underneath solar panels. So here's a few pretty pictures, eye candy. So this top one here, the sheep, that's a Silicon Ranch site down in Southwest Georgia that I've gotten to visit. It's pretty incredible, and it's pretty incredible to see the sheep utilizing the shade. And it would often be too hot of a climate for sheep to grow in that part of the world, but they are, due to kind of the microclimate that solar panels provide. There's also a lot happening with cattle. Beef need a lot of land and solar panels need a lot of land. And the more we can do to figure out how those can go together, the better. There's also a real opportunity, a lot of other states. So this picture is Massachusetts, and they're growing broccoli underneath panels. It'd be great for Georgia to start looking into research for how do we use precision agriculture to find the crops and figure out the designs that increase yields and reduce inputs based on these systems. A little bit more about ongoing research in solar cattle grazing. So one example is Silicon Ranch is doing research here in Georgia to understand the system design and the cost implications for putting cows within an array. So cows are going to rub, cows need a little bit more space, and they're looking into what does it look like to really expand a solar array that takes all these things into considerations. Feasibility for beef lots. So in Colorado, the Colorado Department of Agriculture is actually funding research to understand how solar can be used on beef lots. And there are a lot of federal agrivoltaics projects and grants to be tapped that the state can tap into to further this research. All right, I think I want to reemphasize that I did everything I've talked about or cited or sourced here today. I'd be happy to share with the committee and with anybody in the room, and I'd love to take some questions.
No, we fine. Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you for the suggestions of all three of y'all. It's been wonderful. We're going to now go into our public comments. So let me walk out here and get our sheets. So if anybody has not signed up, please come forward and sign. I think we got a couple of people I know. We actually got 5. Miss George, I'm not gonna let you go first. You always want to go first. Um, Chris Jones. Where's Chris at? There you go. Chris. Oh, okay. Come on up. We'll give everybody about 5 minutes, okay? Yeah, tell us who you are, what you do, why you're here.
My name is Chris Jones, and I'm the young farmer teacher in the county. And I've previously been the FFA advisor for the past 5 years, and this is my first year in the young farmer position. I do appreciate, I know we talked about that age gap, that 47-year-old beginning farmer. And I appreciate the funding that we get to be able to do these programs, that extended year, that extended day that we spend after school with these guys. And just the push to get them into those agricultural colleges that we've mentioned here in the past. Also, just me taking this new role as the young farmer, being able to kind of get with these farmers in the community and be able to put them and push them into those agricultural jobs so that they can kind of see that firsthand experience of that farming and what it looks like. What I was just thinking about, the one little thing real quick is, how could we've got those farmers that maybe maybe they're ready to retire and to pass those farms on. Maybe they don't have that person that wants to take over the family farm. I don't know if there's some way to incentivize those farmers to, I don't know how exactly that looks, but some way to incentivize those farmers to maybe pass that or push it into, maybe let these younger generation take over the reins of that farm somehow. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I know that ground, getting the ground, that starting out getting the ground of moving on into that farmer to create that lasting generational farmer that these new kids could hopefully be. So that's just a little short bit about who I am, and I do appreciate you guys doing this here and all of you guys in the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for coming forward. Jeff Newking. Jeff? Is that the way up here?
Oh, Hawkins.
Hawkins, okay. Hawkins, okay. Jeff, come on. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. The next person is Randall Smith after Jeff.
Should be on.
My name is Jeff Hawkins. I'm retired. I'm currently school board member. I take over on January the 1st. And I just want to talk in general about the farm programs. I've been in the ag industry here in Polk County for the last 30 years. I was an ag teacher and young farmer teacher, and now unfortunately I am retired teacher. So, but I can speak to both aspects, not only the ag ed side, but the teacher shortage as well, that y'all discussed earlier in the meeting. Primarily, we've got a lot of individuals in the county, and we've got a lot of individuals across the state that want to get into the ag industry. They come through the ag ed programs, which the state's been fully funding for a long time, and we've been very appreciative of that. The biggest factor is the land, the capital investment. So for these kids coming out of high school or coming fresh out of college, collateral, they don't have collateral. They've got a degree in their hand, but the banks won't lend money on that most of the time. So it's the land is the issue. And speaking to what Mr. Jones was talking about, if we had an incentive where that farmer, maybe they're not their family, but just a random student coming out of UGA or Fort Valley or ABAC wants to take over and start farming, there's an incentive for that farmer. He hadn't lost his lifetime investment in that property, and he still's compensated for it, but he's continuing the agriculture production, because production of food is going to be it is a national security issue, and it's a state issue. And, we're going to eat regardless of where it's produced. And everybody, we talked about wanting cheap food. Well, if I control your food, then I can control you. So, and we don't want to be in that position where somebody else controls us with the production of food. So we need to prioritize agriculture. And unfortunately, a lot of the local school systems and local governments, it's just not a priority for them. They kind of can't see the forest for the trees because they've grown up in agriculture all around them. I mean, if you take people in this county and drive them from one school to the next, it's hard for them to believe that agriculture is the number one industry in this county. And then you ask them, well, how many farms did you drive by? How many cotton fields? How many head of cattle did you pass? And they start thinking about it, and they're like, oh yeah, that was a lot. So, starting with the FFA in the classroom through ag education, the K through 12 now, the elementary ag ed programs are great, but a lot of schools don't put them in there because you get FTE funding for those teachers, but the backside of it that they've got to fund, it's not a priority for them. So if we could incentivize that to the school systems to add those programs, I think that would go a long way. So you're starting them from K-12, or K all the way up to adult ed. And a lot of school systems there's not a lot taking advantage of it because I think I don't know if it's a marketing thing or how they perceive a priority thing for them. So, and I think that's something that we've got to change not only locally, but we've got to change state and nationally too. It's very easy for people to go to Walmart and get their food off the shelf and they go home and yep, that's where it came from. And they don't understand. So, and I think we've got to do a better job at that. But the main thing is finding to fill that gap from 21 to 47. That gap, because if we don't fill that gap, then the average age is going to be from 47 to 67 to non-existent. So there's got to be programs there that we can move these kids into. And we talked a good bit about some of them today, but of course it all comes back to funding as well. So, and that's all I had to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is Kendall still here? Kendall Smith? He's not? Okay. Mr. Bill Hodge and then Mr. George after that. Mr. Bill?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, good. Thank you all for doing what you're doing. My name is Bill Hodge from Carroll County, Georgia. Chair of the board of the Georgia Agricultural Land Trust, and I have for a number of years. Carroll County had the first purchase and development rights program in the state of Georgia. Fortunately, because we had elected leadership in the county that realized in the early 2000s that urban sprawl was headed west on I-20. And Carroll County has always had a strong agricultural economy and wanted to do something to preserve the agricultural economy there so that it wasn't covered up in development. This is personal to me because I grew up in Virginia on a family farm that is now a subdivision. And then I moved to Georgia in 1978 because urban sprawl crowded us out of a farm in Maryland. So I find this to be something that is of great importance, and the emphasis that you all are putting on it is greatly appreciated. The one thing that hasn't been mentioned today with all the good information that you have heard is food miles. Food miles can be defined as the distance between where agricultural products are grown as to where they're consumed. And farmers are typically price takers. And in this food miles and the distancing is where most of the profit is coined instead of going into the farmers' pockets. Everybody operates on a cost plus basis in that distancing aspect. And I tell people that Georgia is the land of opportunity, primarily because we have a long growing season. We can grow a diversity of food crops. but we have significant water resources and we have a growing population of consumers. Why can't we grow our food here and consume it here too? Or at least get some degree of a regional food system. So I'll plant that seed with you. The primary reason that I see is the lack of infrastructure to further process value-added agricultural products. So something to think about in terms of preserving ag land and farmland in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. Mr. George? Mr. George Chelicek.
Got the last, the pine tree that didn't blow down in southeast Georgia.
Mr. George, let me say this. got to mention, Senator Sam Watson has actually been on Zoom with us during 90% of this program. So we appreciate you, Sam, listening in, and appreciate all your hard work in trying to take care of the vegetables.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My dad always told me to surround myself with people that were smarter than me, so I'd spend less money and would be more successful doing it. So I appreciate y'all being in the 2/3 of the upper class of college and high school, so I could be in the bottom 1/3. But I appreciate the members of this committee coming together to have these sessions around the state. And so I'd like to just share a few things with you this morning. First of all, the FFA members being here, I think certainly that's our next generation. But when we have to look at change, sometimes it's hard to adapt. And I was an FFA member. I was also a member of 4-H. But what if? Because I went around, I did a agribusiness expo back April 20th in Rockdale County. We had 425 students come through in 3 hours, sharing over 300 different agribusiness careers in the state. But these students, when I went to the schools, I said, you know, you don't have to wear bib overalls and chew and spit tobacco to be in this industry. Well, I had to go to Goodwill and buy a pair of bib overalls because none of these students knew what they were. So I'm wondering, and this would be tough, but what if there was a name change? And I know this is ingrained throughout the United States, but what if it was the FFA was changed to the Future Conservationist and Sustainability Stewards of America? I wonder how many more students would go, I need to look into this industry. Secondly, in urban areas in the state of Georgia, if you have 1/100th of an acre, that's 426 square feet, the USDA will provide you subsidies for growing your fruits and vegetables if you keep receipts. But see, there's so many folks throughout this state that don't realize this information. So with Catherine and Mallory's information, having worked with the International Harvester Corporation and American Honda Motor Company, I learned one thing: people are down on what they're not up on. So what if we were to start an initiative and share with all 159 counties, their commissioners in these cities, with these two presentations? Wouldn't they gain a lot of knowledge? I don't know how we could do it, but it would be a great event. Next, just for y'all, I'm the chairperson for the Rockdale Saltwater Conservation District and also the Upper Oak Mulligan Basin Area Council, which is one of the 14 river basins in the state. But let's look at dollars and cents. I know we've talked about the Farm Bill, and we're still awaiting one. 325 or $428 billion. 325 billion goes to the SNAP program to feed our students across this great country. But only 7% or 29 billion goes to conservation. And that's what we're talking about here today, I believe, is conservation. Well, in 1976, the state of Missouri, the voters approved a constitutional amendment for permanently dedicating 1/8 of 1 cent towards conservation. That provides the state of Missouri over $100 million a year towards farming, conservation, and sustainability efforts. So might be something we could take a look at from the Gold Dome perspective. Next, I left you an article from Morgan County. And yes, this is the third county in the state that has adopted a farmland protection program. Secondly, is the Farm Belt community concept, which we've already started one in Barnesville, Georgia, which ties together the major cities to the smaller communities throughout the state. And the Rural Studio at Auburn University has developed a lot of this. And I think we can grab some of those Alabama folks and bring them over here for a second and show it, say, what are you doing? So if we were to look at development today in the United States, if you look at the developers, they're bringing their visions to the citizens. Levittown, Pennsylvania was developed in 1947 by Mr. Levitt to provide housing to the troops coming back from World War II. Those developments are still being pushed on the citizens in this state. What I say is we need to get folks to look at Serenbe, Honeywood Farms, Chattahoochee Hills, Pendergrass Farms, East Lake Commons around the metro area so you can see what can be done to conserve land, but also provide affordable housing to citizens. So on November the 9th, and I left you this in your package, is Commissioner Ted Terry in DeKalb County is hosting an event which is going to deal with planning and development sustainability with over 20 organizations. It's going to be a family event, going to look at urban planning and also the county's growing commitment to environmental resilience. So what I'll leave you with is DeKalb County. When you're looking at preservation of land, you have to have a real in-depth analysis of what your land is currently, so to see what you want to do with it in the future. And I'll give you a copy of this before I leave. So if you don't know what your land's being utilized for now in each county, how do you expect to ensure that you have good land stewardship in 100 years from now? So they're taking the right direction. Hopefully some of y'all could attend that on November the 9th. So we'll just kind of take it from there. And again, I appreciate y'all taking the time out of your schedules to look at this great information. I came from the state of Virginia. I grew up on a cattle farm in Prince William County, Manassas, Virginia. There are no cattle farms or no dairy farms left in that county. It is now the world of data centers. which I understand we need, but we do need a balance between farmland and development. So whatever I can help y'all with in the future, I'm here to help you. So thank you so very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. George. Very, very well said. Thank y'all so much for being here today. It was a great, great meeting, and thanks to Will and Catherine and Mallory for presentations, and thank you so much for your suggestions. Many, 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 many suggestions. We appreciate that so much. This panel or this group of senators fully understands the preservation of Georgia farmland and understands the need for it. And we promise y'all faithfully that we as Georgia State senators will do everything we can to preserve Georgia's farmland. This guy is chairman of Georgia. He's chairman of the Agricultural Committee in the Senate, and we put a big load on his shoulders to carry forward. We are adjourned. Thank y'all. Y'all have a great afternoon.